Please welcome Colorado State Senator Kevin Lundberg.
It's great being here. I first met Mark Meckler as he and a longtime friend of mine, Mike Ferris, were developing the Convention of the States Project, a nationwide grassroots operation for the Article 5 movement. Convention of the States Project is a part of the organization that Mark started. He founded in 2012, Citizens for Self-Governance. Mr. Meckler has been a citizen activist who has motivated millions of people to make a difference. In 2009, he helped start the Tea Party Patriots. He and his wife, Patty, have been tireless warriors for We the People for many years. Jim DeMint has been a U.S. Congressman, a U.S. Senator, and most recently the president of the Heritage Foundation. He has always distinguished himself as one of the most solid conservatives in our nation's capital, standing for freedom, for families, and for life. Now he is senior advisor for the Convention of the States Project, promoting and using the Constitution to take our country back through our citizen-elected state legislatures. Moderating this discussion is a man who is no stranger to the Colorado political world, Ken Clark. It is a great honor to now introduce to you Mark Meckler, Jim DeMint, and Ken Clark. Thank you.
It is great to be back in Colorado. Thank you all for coming to the Western Conservative Summit and joining us for our Convention of States program. What I wanted to do is get two different perspectives on what is going on in Washington, D.C. So we have sitting to my right Senator Jim DeMint. He is a former businessman. He went and worked inside the belly of the beast for several years and was able to maintain his soul. So we're going to get his perspective. And then we're going to get the perspective of the ultimate citizen activist, co-founded the Tea Party Patriots movement, Citizens for Self-Governance, and the co-founder of the Convention of States Project. So, Senator DeMint, I'd like to start with you.
Well, thank you, Ken, and I know it's great for you to be back here in Colorado. Thank all of you who are here today, and it's been great to see a number of you. Some of you were across the street at the ALEC conference with a lot of state legislators. And I've seen a number of you over the years working in the conservative movement. And I know you don't do this just for something to do. You're all here because you want to make a difference. And to make a difference, we come together in summits like this to pull our ideas together so we can move on the same page. And I've seen how effective that can be. And there's no question in my mind that it's conservatives and the work that you've done have given the Republicans the majority in the House and the Senate and the White House. And it's time to really make a difference. If you're like, I think every American, you're frustrated at what's been happening the last several months. And I know I am, after being in the House for 6 years, the Senate for 8 years, working as hard as probably anyone else except maybe Tom Coburn, who's now working with me on the Convention of the States, to stop spending, to stop the wasteful earmarks, to try to move towards a balanced budget and have some fiscal sanity in Washington. But as you know, and I'm sure you've been watching this, that Washington's not getting any closer to a balanced budget. They continue to borrow money. We hear a figure of $20 trillion in debt, but folks, that's just a small part of what we owe. The unfunded liability, the money we borrowed from Social Security, from China, the money that the Federal Reserve has printed. We're really on a precipice of an economic disaster. And the reason I'm here today, it's hard for me to say that after being there 20 years inside, working with Heritage, working around the country, that it's no longer possible, and it's very naive for us to believe that Washington will ever stop spending or balance its budget. And our founders envisioned a day such as this. And you could go back and look in history, the debate at the Constitutional Convention. They knew that governments tend to grow and freedom subsides as government replaces our freedom. I know all of you know that the states came together to form the federal government, and their biggest concern was to limit what the federal government could do. Article 5 of the Constitution is there because our founders realized that once a government gets so big and even tyrannical, I think that word is not out of place today, that government will not propose constitutional amendments to restrain itself. So they put in Article 5 for such a time as this, that states who were supposedly in control of this process could come together and propose amendments that would restrain the federal government. This is such a time that we cannot ignore. The federal government will not stop spending. It will never recede its control over the states and the people, no matter who we elect. And if you need any evidence, just look at Washington today and the attempt to repeal Obamacare after promising for 8 years and having a bill that they'd already passed. They won't even send that through because too many Republicans want more money, more programs, more subsidies, more bailouts, more expansion of Medicaid. And you've seen all of this. So, folks, I'm asking you as conservatives who've worked alongside with me for many years, and Ken, I just want to go ahead and mention it because I know you were going to ask. I've heard the complaints that we cannot do what our founders intended because it's risky for states to come together and propose amendments that then have to be ratified by 38 states. Folks, I hear a runaway convention. It can't happen. What can happen is a runaway Congress, runaway spending, runaway debt, runaway bureaucrats, runaway judges. They're the ones that are going to take our rights away, and we see them chipping away at our rights and the autonomy of our states every year. You don't see adding rights coming out of Washington or moving things back to the states, even though we've been talking about federalism for years, and everyone running for office as a Republican or a conservative say we should do that. You don't see that. But there are many states fighting for the freedom to educate the children the way they want, to even their own health plans. But folks, I'm here to just plead with you to help us do what our founders intended, to help us get 34 states to call for a convention around 3 ideas: to restrain the federal government fiscally, to restrain the authority and jurisdiction of the federal government over the states, and to limit the terms of federal officials, including bureaucrats, judges, congressmen. You know, it's funny, Ken, I know I'm talking too long, that folks all over the country clap for that. But it's the folks in Congress and even state legislators who don't like the idea of limiting terms. But when I went to the House, I said I would serve no more than 6 years, and I did it. And when I went to the Senate, it was no more than 12 years, and I didn't even make it 12 there. But folks, I'm telling you, you'll hear some criticism from different groups, but after being in Washington, the only way we can save our country is an Article 5 Convention of the States. Thank you, Ken.
Senator DeMint, thank you. I'd like to ask the same questions of the president and co-founder of the Convention of States Project. And Mark, you've come a long way since being the co-founder of the Tea Party Patriots, the largest Tea Party organization this country has known. And so your perspective is very unique. So please talk about that and then address the runaway as well.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. You know, as somebody who's from the West, I've spent a bunch of time here in Colorado. I appreciate the Western lifestyle and culture, so it's really an honor to be here. You know, this is kind of, the West is my home. I have the Western mentality and Western sentiment. I live in the hills in Northern California. Frankly, California doesn't seem all that much like the West anymore, so we're in the process of moving to Texas. So California is the lost continent these days. You know, I do come out of the Tea Party movement. I know there are a lot of folks who came out of the movement that are in the room today. I meet you all across the country, and I'm really proud of what the Tea Party movement accomplished. I hear a lot from folks that the Tea Party movement didn't accomplish anything and that it's gone, it disappeared. What happened to the Tea Party movement? My answer to that is it's categorically incorrect. First of all, it accomplished the most important thing that it set out to do, which is it changed the political narrative in America. That's no small feat. If you think back before the elections, where the Tea Party started, before the 2010 elections, nobody was talking about the Constitution. There are a few folks like Jim and Tom in the Senate who talked about those kinds of things, but it was rare. Today, I would argue more people in America carry around a pocket Constitution than ever before in American history. That in and of itself is important and incredible. In 2010, because of the Tea Party, we had this incredible historic switch, biggest party switch in Congress since 1938. We thought everything was going to change because that's what we were told, right? If you vote for the right people, send good folks to Washington, everything will be okay. Well, it's not true. We've learned it in spades. We gave them the Senate because we were told we'd just only have the House. If we had the Senate, everything would be different, and nothing changed. And now we've given them the White House. And for anybody who believed that Republican control of the House and the Senate and the White House would deliver liberty back to the people of the states, I give you this week's debate in Washington, D.C. Right? I hope you've been disabused of the notion, and with all due respect to the president, even the best president and the best Congress don't have the power to return liberty to the people. And there's a reason for that, and this is something that I discovered through working in politics all over the country for the last 8 years, is that we don't suffer from a personnel problem. We suffer from a structural problem. The founders created this beautifully balanced structure, right? The states created the federal government, and most of the power was imbued in the states. Broad, unspecific, all-encompassing. The states and the people have the power, and the federal government got this small set of tightly enumerated powers. When I say that, inherently that doesn't resemble anything we see in our country today. The balance is exactly the opposite. Massive, broad, sweeping powers in Washington, D.C., structurally granted. Congress has taken those powers, presidents have taken those powers, and fundamentally the courts have destroyed the balance of power. I hear a lot of people say this, why are you talking about messing with the Constitution? Our Constitution is a beautiful, perfect document. My answer is this: what Constitution are you referring to? If you're referring to the one that you're carrying around in your pocket or that I carry around in my cell phone, the original, beautiful, crafted Constitution, I agree with you. It's a beautiful, almost perfect document. Unfortunately, that's not our Constitution anymore, Ken. And most people don't know that. We have two Constitutions. The one that you and I love, it's under glass in the National Archives. If you haven't had a chance to see the original, I recommend it. The one that we actually live under, I have one on my desk. I bought it so I could travel with it, but it's too heavy to put in my luggage. 2,738 pages today, not including the supplements. That's your Constitution, ladies and gentlemen, as given to you by the United States Supreme Court, and it contains all the decisions that you hate. It contains the decisions expanding the Commerce Clause power. The Commerce Clause intended to give the federal government a tiny sliver of power over a little bit of stuff where we ship goods across state lines. The Commerce Clause, which now gives the federal government the authority for the Energy Department, the Commerce Department, the EPA, the Department of Education, all operate because the Supreme Court said they could exist under the Commerce power. The founders would be astounded by that. So these are fundamental problems created by the United States Supreme Court, creating new constitutional rights that never existed, that the founders never intended to exist, given to us courtesy of a Supreme Court out of control, a branch of government that the founders intended to be the weakest. They said it had no sword and it had no purse. It would be the weakest branch of government. Now those people in robes are the most powerful people in America, and one person on that court decides everything for everybody. It was never intended to be that way, and so the question is, what do we do about that? How do you fix that? There's only one answer to that question. There's literally only one answer to that question. If you agree with what I just said, and you agree the structure of the country is broken, and you agree Washington, D.C. has too much power, and you agree that the courts are out of control, and I know everybody in this room agrees with that, then you have to ask yourself, what are we going to do about that? Thank God, and I do mean thank God, because it was inspired, the founders gave us the answer. They inserted Article 5 into the Constitution, the second clause of Article 5, inserted 2 days before the end of the convention. Colonel George Mason rose and addressed the assembly 2 days before the end of the convention. He said, we have a fundamental problem with the document. We've created the right of Congress to propose amendments should they deem them necessary, but we haven't given the same right to the people acting through the states. And then he asks a question that resonates across history to us here today. Are we so naive that we believe that a federal government that becomes a tyranny will propose the appropriate amendments to restrain its own tyranny? That question resonates. I wish we had video from the convention because I bet they laughed and slapped their foreheads, right? And we know that's basically what happened because Madison's notes reflect these two words, nin com in Latin, no debate. No debate. They debated everything at the convention. Unanimously adopted then and there to give you, the people, the right to rise up through your states and restrain federal tyranny. Unanimously put in the Constitution, the only item unanimously inserted into the United States Constitution. And so what I know to be a fact, not an opinion, a fact, if you don't like the way things are today, if you think the balance of power is broken, if you think the Supreme Court has overstepped its bounds, you have a single tool. And that tool is the second clause of Article 5. Today, 12 states have passed the resolution calling for a convention of states. We're 1/3 of the way to convention. It'll be pending in 20-plus states in the next legislative session. It's been introduced in a total of 48 states across the country. It's really incredible momentum. When you have guys like Tom Coburn, Senator Jim DeMint, Mark Levin, and a whole myriad of people all across the political spectrum, from the far right and real solid conservatives like Jim, Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio. It's people all across the spectrum. I sat with Ed Meese. He says it's the only way to save the country. You got to know, we're given one tool by the founders for this moment, and that tool is Article 5. And I hope you'll join us and elevate Article 5 here in Colorado. Get your legislature to pass it. You guys have a chance to become the 13th state.
Senator, amen, amen. Senator Mint, I wanted to ask you this question because you've been inside the belly of the beast, and like the rest of us, you travel all over this country. You get to talk to people all over the country that truly care about our republic and restoring it to its founding principles. I hear a lot of fear out there. I hear terms like con-con. I hear terms like runaway. I hear things like the left is going to take it over. What do you say to that, Senator?
I feel a lot safer in this group than I did in the floor of the United States Senate. I can tell you that. And my rights are much safer. One of the things that's encouraged me over the years is, despite the battles inside Washington and my frustration and disappointment, when I travel around the country, there's so many Americans from all walks of life, and they usually tell me three things, Ken. They'll say, thanks for fighting. We're praying for you. What can I do? People want to do something. They want to make a difference. They're worried about their country, and they want to stand up and do something. This gives us a focus, all of us. I mean, we all got involved in the Tea Party. Electing good people would solve the problem, but as Mark says, it's really not a personnel problem. I mean, there's a courage deficit in Washington, but a lot of that comes from the structure. And just anyone who's beaten down over and over again is eventually going to give up, unless they're connected with the grassroots across the country. But I trust the people. And the state legislatures are not perfect, but because they have to compete with each other in different states to create the best environment for business and people to live, they can do a whole lot more good than we find in Washington. This fear that people try to spread around, that's not true. If you read Article 5, it's a convention to propose amendments. You can call it an amendments convention or a suggestion convention, but it's certainly not a convention to rewrite the Constitution. And my comfort is I know that there are 13 states, then we could probably all name them, that would stop any amendment that infringed on our freedom of speech, our freedom of religion, our freedom of assembly, or our freedom to bear arms. All of the freedoms that we have are much safer in the hands of the states and the people than they are Congress and the courts. And we know that because the Congress has written little laws that kind of infringe on gun rights. The courts have done a whole lot with freedom of speech and turned regular conversations into hate speech. And so when people, I almost have to chuckle, and I try to do it respectfully, when folks say, oh, it's risky to have a constitutional convention or even a convention of the states for amendments. I want to say, what do you have to lose? How could it get worse? And I've kind of joked, but it's half true. If you told me we had a 50-50 chance that a convention of states would turn into a disaster, I say that's a better bet than I've got right now. So this, again, most of politics is driven by fear. There are a lot of well-intended people who have in their mind the same thing I did, Ken, that what they're talking about is a constitutional convention, and we're not talking about that. And the way it's set up, this idea that it could get out of control is just not true. Because if 34 states send delegates to a convention to write amendments for 3 specific subject areas, you think they're going to ratify amendments that are outside? They won't. This is in the hands of the people in the state legislatures. And believe me, folks, after being in the House and the Senate and in Washington, doing everything I could to elect good people through Senate Conservatives Fund, getting good information to people through a think tank process, I tell you, Article 5, as the founders intended, is our only way to save our country right now. And I don't say that lightly.
Mark, I wanted to... Thank you. Mark, I wanted to ask you a 2-part question. And the first one is is that I am a big believer in balancing the federal budget. But it seems to me that maybe that does, maybe that doesn't go far enough. Address that, and then also address the issue of on Good Friday, a lot of folks lined up against the Article 5 process. So talk about those two things real quick.
Sure. On a balanced budget, I think inherently all of us believe in the idea of balancing our budget. And we got to do it at home, right? If there's no money in the checking account and you keep writing checks, bad things happen. The federal government's gotten away with doing this for a very long time because unlike you and me or even the states, they could print money and do other manipulations, buy our own debt and stuff like that. But eventually, that's coming home to roost. So virtually everybody in America supports the idea of a balanced budget amendment on the federal government. But there are inherent dangers in that if we don't add structural limitations to the federal government. We get the chance to work with Senator Tom Coburn, and Tom was a doctor before he was a senator or a member of the House. And one of the things he says as a physician, you got to treat the disease and not the symptoms. The fact that our budget is out of balance is a symptom. It's not the disease. What's it a symptom of? It's a symptom of too much federal government power. If they couldn't do all this stuff, they wouldn't have all the money or wouldn't need all the money to spend on all this stuff. So if we don't put structural limitations on the federal government, they're going to find a way to get that stuff done. And here's what they're going to do. Colorado's a perfect example. All the states suffer from this. Guys have any unfunded mandates you got to deal with from the federal government? Of course you do. We all do in every state. So imagine what will happen if we tell the feds, hey, y'all have to balance your budget. They're going to say, great, we're not going to cancel the programs. We're just going to give you more unfunded mandates. So your taxes are going to go up here in Colorado, and you're going to have to pay for those because the Supreme Court has already told you, you got to pay for those. And so they're just going to push those programs down on you. They're going to raise taxes. They're going to remove deductions. They're going to do everything they can do to squeeze revenue out of you to make you pay for the things that they still want to do. So while I believe in a balanced budget amendment, without other structural fixes, it will actually cause more problems than it will solve. Another problem with the balanced budget amendment is the way the federal government accounts is extraordinary. When you look at their books, you think maybe they're using dancing unicorns and rainbows to do their accounting. But they just decide things are off book, unfunded liabilities are off book, there are black box programs that are not accounted for. You have to impose generally accepted accounting principles on the federal government. Without those things, if we don't do those things, in addition to a balanced budget amendment is a grave danger to the United States of America. So that's one problem. So the second question was about who's opposed and who's in favor. And this is really important. You need to know always, you should know in politics, who are your enemies and who are your friends. Sometimes that's not entirely clear, and sometimes they switch around depending on a given situation. One of the things that's really rare in politics is that your enemies clearly identify themselves. It's even less usual that they actually put themselves on a list that you can read and you can show to people. So if you want to know who is against Convention of States, and this should give you a good enough reason to support it if you're wondering, on Good Friday of this year, 230 plus of the most radical leftist groups in America got together and put out a press release led by Common Cause, Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, both big Soros-funded policy groups, and said that the worst thing that could happen in the United States of America was a convention of states because we would roll back 115 years of progressive gains. How's that sound? Not bad, right? So it sounds crazy. Like you think, oh, that's a conspiracy thing that Mark's saying. 230 groups, and we probably never heard of any of them. So I'm just going to rattle off a few of them. And I would challenge you to look at this list on our website and then go look at their own press release so you see I'm not making it up because it sounds too fantastic to believe, right? So Common Cause, Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, and then they're aligned with an alphabet soup. So they're aligned with the NAACP, the ACLU, the AFL-CIO, the SEIU, La Raza, Planned Parenthood. Literally, I would challenge you, look at the list, look at the press release, and find one group on there, or one group that's not on there that you know of that's part of the radical left. They're all there. Everyone. I've spent days looking at trying to find, are any of the bad guys not on this list? That's my list. It's pinned up in front of my desk. I know my enemies list now. It's incredible. So when I look in politics, who's lined up for and who's lined up against, I always look at that because I want to know, am I on the right side of an argument? So this is really important that you know. If you oppose what we're talking about, I'm not saying you're one of them, but you have to know you're aligned with them right now, and you ought to reconsider your position.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. Senator DeMint, we only have about 2 minutes left, so I wanted to close with you. And so please address that. You spent some time in Washington, D.C. I bet it's not real easy to figure out who your friends are or your enemies are in the District of Columbia. Am I right?
No, it's not, and unfortunately the left is good at staying organized and being together, even if they disagree on some points. Unfortunately, a lot of us as conservatives, we're free thinkers, and we're pay more attention to detail, are not always together. And one of my goals in working with this is getting us together. I know there's some well-intended people out there, part of groups, who think, as I did several years ago, that we couldn't do this because it was risky. I'm to the point, and I am confident that we're going to lose our country. We're going to have some kind of economic catastrophe if states don't step up and call for this convention, restrain the government. And as Mark said, it's more than balancing the budget. If they keep doing everything they're doing, it's impossible to balance the budget. So we have to stop unfunded mandates. Clarify what the Commerce Clause is, the things that we need to do. So I just would appeal to all of you. If you hear someone who says, no, this is a dangerous, risky idea, ask them, what is their solution? Do you really believe that Washington will stop spending? Do you think we can elect a few more Republicans and then suddenly we're going to start reducing spending and that we're actually going to get the federal government out of education, out of all of the health care and everything that they're doing? I don't think any of us honestly believe that anymore. So it's time to look at the alternative, the only alternative that our founders gave us, and come together as conservatives all across America and do this in a way that actually makes our country better and closer to what our founders intended. So, folks, I'm grateful for your work all around the country. Many of you have been at this for decades. Let's come together and encourage states all across the country to do what our founders intended.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Mark Meckler. Very much appreciate it. The Convention of States Project will be having a breakout session at 3 p.m. Mark Meckler and I, along with the Colorado team, will be heading that up. We would ask everybody that's interested in the Convention of States Project to please join us. Thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to see so many fellow patriots.
Sign the petition at cosaction.com and get as many of your friends and family to do the same. With your full address, your state legislators will know that you really are their constituents in their district. Our success depends on you, so we're inviting you to be part of history. Let's invoke the constitutional solution that's as big as the problem.